She spun once on television and became the most powerful woman in America. But long before the golden lasso and the bulletproof bracelets, she was a mixed-race teenager in Phoenix who felt like she didn't belong anywhere. A broke actress down to her last $25, and later a wife who sat through a federal fraud trial fighting to keep her family from being destroyed by a scandal that had nothing to do with her. This is the real story of Lynda Carter, the woman behind Wonder Woman, and what she actually lived through is far more dramatic than anything her character ever fought on screen. Stay with me, because this isn't really a story about a superhero costume. It's a story about what it costs to keep smiling in public while everything behind the scenes is falling apart. Lynda Jean Cordova Carter was born on July 24, 1951, in Phoenix, Arizona, into a household that blended two very different worlds. Her father, Colby Carter, was an antique dealer with English and Irish roots. Her mother, Juana Cordova, came from a Mexican family with deep ties to Chihuahua. Lynda had two siblings, a brother named Vincent and a sister named Pamela. And growing up mixed-race in conservative 1950s and 1960s, Arizona meant she often felt like she didn't fully belong to either side of her own family tree, caught between two cultures in a place that wasn't especially welcoming to either. When Lynda was around 10 years old, her parents divorced, and her mother was suddenly left to raise the children largely on her own, working long hours on the line at a Motorola factory just to keep the household afloat. Money was tight, and the stress of that instability shaped much of her childhood. Her father's visits after the split became infrequent, and Lynda has said that absence taught her early on to lean mostly on herself and on her mother, a lesson that would echo through different chapters of her adult life. On top of that, Lynda was dealing with something else entirely: her own body. She shot up early, eventually reaching 5'9", towering over her classmates at an age when most girls were desperate to blend in rather than stand out. She was teased for her height, and for what she felt was an awkward gangly presence, and she retreated inward, feeling like she simply didn't fit the narrow standard of beauty the magazines of the era were selling. What almost nobody could see underneath that shy exterior was a genuine musical gift that was quietly building towards something enormous. Music became her escape long before acting ever entered the picture. By her mid-teens, she was locking herself in her room, studying vocal technique, mimicking the singers she admired for hours at a time. Eventually, she found the nerve to join a local Phoenix band called Just Us, playing pizza parlors and small neighborhood gigs, before moving up to a more serious outfit called The Relatives. One of her bandmates in that group was a young drummer named Gary Burhoff, who would go on to become internationally famous playing Radar O'Reilly on the television series MASH. The two of them spent countless hours rehearsing together, dreaming about a life far away from the Arizona desert. Their friendship endured long after both of their careers took off in completely different directions, a small reminder of how unpredictable the road to fame in Hollywood can be for anyone who steps onto it. Lynda was sharp enough academically to earn a scholarship to Arizona State University. She turned it down. At an age when most of her peers were worrying about final exams, she made the kind of decision that terrifies most parents. She packed her bags and joined the touring circuit instead, chasing a music career on the road. She was only 16 years old when she started performing in smoky lounges and casino showrooms across Nevada, in Reno, and Las Vegas, singing for grown adults in rooms that had nothing to do with a normal teenage life. Her father was reportedly furious and confronted her mother about it directly, demanding to know how she could let their daughter go out on the road with strangers twice her age. Her mother's answer, according to Lynda, was simple. Once Lynda had made up her mind about something, there was no talking her out of it. For the next several years, she lived the grinding reality of the touring musician's life, performing up to 3 sets a night, riding buses between small towns, dealing with rowdy crowds, wearing her voice down night after night while learning, the hard way, how to hold an audience's attention. Eventually the shine wore off. The road that once felt like freedom started to feel like exhaustion, and the dream of becoming a headlining vocalist began to lose its appeal. She needed a different direction, and she found one in an unlikely place: beauty pageants. Back home in Arizona, her height and striking presence made her a natural fit for the pageant circuit of the early 1970s, and she found success quickly, winning Miss Arizona and then, in 1972, Miss World USA. That win sent her to London to represent the United States at the Miss World pageant itself, where she reached the semifinals among dozens of national delegates. On paper, it looked like a dream run: national press, sashes and crowns, even a stint touring with Bob Hope on his USO shows for American troops stationed overseas. Underneath all of that, Lynda has said she felt hollow. The pageant world, with its relentless focus on measurements and appearance, and its constant judgment of women as objects to be ranked, conflicted with everything she actually valued. She felt more like a mannequin on display than an artist with anything real to offer. And she knew she needed to walk away from that world for good, even without knowing exactly what came next. Years later, once Wonder Woman made her a household name, Lynda would become one of the most visible Latina-identifying actresses in American genre television of that era. A fact that meant a great deal to viewers who had rarely seen anyone from a Mexican background portrayed as a hero rather than a stereotype. What came next, though, was Los Angeles. With a little money saved and a stubborn refusal to give up, she packed her car and drove west, ready to try acting even though she had no formal training and no industry connections. Hollywood in the mid-1970s was not interested in a former pageant queen with zero dramatic credits, and the rejection she faced was immediate and constant. She spent months in acting classes and endless casting calls, picking up only the occasional small guest role, including a minor part on Starsky and Hutch, while her savings quietly disappeared into the expensive reality of Los Angeles rent and bills. By 1975, she was down to roughly $25 in her bank account, eating as cheaply as possible, and seriously weighing whether to give up entirely and drive back to Arizona in defeat. And then, right at the point where most people would have already left, her agent called about one last audition. A network was casting the lead role in a new series based on a classic comic book character, and they were struggling to find someone who could combine physical presence with genuine warmth and moral conviction. Lynda walked into that room, and by every account, completely won over a skeptical group of producers. She landed the role of a lifetime, Wonder Woman. The part transformed her overnight from a broke, rejected actress into one of the most recognizable faces in the country. But making the show work took real commitment. Lynda didn't just want to wear the costume. She wanted to embody what the character actually represented, and one of the show's most iconic elements came directly from her own imagination. Producers needed a way for Diana Prince to transform into Wonder Woman without expensive effects, and had been considering something as clunky as a spinning platform borrowed from a department store display. Lynda, drawing on her years as a dancer, suggested a fast, graceful pirouette instead. That single spin became one of the most recognizable pieces of television imagery of its era. The physical demands of the show were serious, and television safety standards in the late 1970s were nowhere near what they are today. Lynda performed a large number of her own stunts, including a genuinely dangerous sequence dangling beneath a helicopter high above the ground, something that would almost certainly require a trained stunt double under today's production rules. Network executives had doubted a female-led action series could pull in a wide audience. Lynda proved them wrong almost immediately. The show became a genuine hit, running first on ABC and then on CBS, and Lynda Carter became a household name, a poster on the walls of countless bedrooms, and enough of a cultural symbol that Gloria Steinem chose her character for the cover of the very first issue of Ms. Magazine, cementing her as more than just a television star, but a genuine feminist icon of the era. Lynda also used the leverage that success gave her to push back against the pay gap that was common for female leads at the time, later saying she felt a responsibility to the young girls watching to demand the same respect, on screen and off, that any male action star would have received without having to ask. The show eventually sold into syndication across dozens of countries, and Lynda has said that even decades later she still meets fans from far outside the United States who tell her the character was the first strong woman they ever saw on their own television screens growing up. If you've been enjoying this and haven't subscribed to Old Tapes yet, go ahead and do it now. We bring you the real stories behind the legends every week. While her career was hitting heights she could barely have imagined a few years earlier, her personal life was quietly falling apart behind the scenes. During the run of the show, Lynda became involved with a powerful Hollywood manager named Ron Samuels, who at the time also represented other major television actresses of the era, including Jacqueline Smith and Lindsay Wagner. Lynda and Ron married in 1977. From the outside it looked like a glamorous power couple, red carpets and magazine spreads and all the trappings of Hollywood success. Behind closed doors, Lynda would later describe the marriage as one of the most difficult chapters of her life. Samuels was deeply enmeshed in managing her career, and the line between supportive husband and controlling business partner blurred in ways that became suffocating. He pushed her toward projects and endorsements based on what would earn the most money, rather than what she actually wanted to do, and the arguments at home reportedly grew intense enough that rumors circulated through Hollywood that the couple had stopped even sharing a bedroom. She was, by any external measure, the biggest female star on television, and yet she has described feeling profoundly isolated inside her own house. After years of quiet unhappiness, she finally filed for divorce in 1982, emotionally drained but finally free of the arrangement. She emerged from that marriage wary of trusting anyone in the industry again. And the person who eventually changed that showed up in one of the least glamorous settings imaginable: a corporate dinner tied to Maybelline, the cosmetics brand she had recently signed on to represent in a partnership that would end up lasting more than a decade. At that dinner, she was introduced to a Washington attorney named Robert Altman. She initially assumed, after years surrounded by smooth-talking Hollywood types, that a corporate lawyer from the East Coast would bore her within minutes. She was wrong almost immediately. Robert was sharp, genuinely engaged, and most importantly, completely unimpressed by her fame. He talked to her about politics and literature and life outside the entertainment bubble, treating her like an actual person rather than a poster. Something serious began to build between them almost right away. The problem was geography. Lynda's career was rooted in Los Angeles. Robert's law practice was firmly based in Washington, D.C. Rather than let distance kill the relationship, Lynda made the decision that stunned her agents and the Hollywood press. On January 29, 1984, she married Robert Altman and packed up her life to move to the East Coast, choosing the relationship over the convenience of staying close to the industry that had made her famous. She didn't stop working entirely, flying back for television specials and promotional appearances, but the shine of a traditional Hollywood career had genuinely faded for her. In 1987, she and Robert built a roughly 20,000 square foot custom home in Potomac, Maryland, just outside Washington, and started building the family life she had been craving. Their son James arrived on January 14, 1988, followed by their daughter Jessica on October 7, 1990. Lynda has said in interviews that real happiness comes from the people you surround yourself with, and she poured herself into raising her children with a focus on education and values rather than material comfort, determined to give them a grounded upbringing far removed from the distortions of celebrity life. That stability held for several years. Then, in 1992, everything was upended. Robert Altman became entangled in a massive international financial scandal involving the Bank of Credit and Commerce International and its secret purchase of an American banking company, a case that also drew in the prominent political figure Clark Clifford. Robert faced allegations of bank fraud and conspiracy tied to the bank's secret and illegal ownership of an American financial institution, charges serious enough to carry the possibility of a lengthy federal prison sentence if the jury had ruled against him. Robert reportedly refused a plea deal outright, insisting on his innocence even after Clifford was ultimately ruled too ill to stand trial and had his portion of the case separated from the rest of the proceedings. Almost overnight, the quiet family life Lynda had built in Maryland was thrown into the center of a media storm, with reporters camped outside their home and Robert's entire career, and potentially his freedom, hanging in the balance. Friends reportedly urged Lynda to distance herself publicly to protect her own image. She refused. Every day of the grueling trial, which stretched across roughly 5 months, Lynda sat in the front row of the courtroom, sketching the proceedings to stay focused, defending her husband's character to reporters outside, and refusing to let the ordeal define her family from a distance. In 1993, Robert was fully acquitted of all charges. Lynda was seen on the courthouse steps that day with her arm around him, telling reporters simply, "Not guilty, not guilty." But the toll of that ordeal, layered on top of years of unresolved pressure from her earlier fame, had already done quiet damage. Behind the composed public face she showed the world, Lynda had been struggling privately with alcohol, a coping mechanism that had crept up on her gradually over years of stress and eventually spiraled into something serious. She kept it hidden remarkably well, even from many people close to her. By the late 1990s, recognizing that it was putting her health, her marriage, and her relationship with her children at risk, she made what she has called one of the bravest decisions of her life. She confronted the addiction directly, asked her husband for support, and entered treatment. She has spoken about how painful that process was, forcing her to work through years of buried stress. But she came out the other side and has maintained her sobriety for decades since. Years later, she spoke publicly about the experience in an interview with People magazine, stating plainly that she was an alcoholic, choosing to say it openly rather than let anyone else define the story for her. With her health and her family stabilized, Lynda gradually let the spotlight back into her life, this time entirely on her own terms. As her children grew older, James went on to earn a history degree from the University of Michigan, followed by a law degree from George Washington University, eventually joining his father's company, while Jessica pursued her own path as well. Meanwhile, Lynda returned to her very first love, music, forming a jazz and blues band, and performing at venues including the Kennedy Center, releasing new material that critics said showed a voice that had only deepened with age. Away from the stage, Both Lynda and Robert had become active in Democratic political circles in Washington through the 1990s, co-hosting Democratic National Committee events, and maintaining a friendship with Bill and Hillary Clinton that had begun not long after Lynda first arrived in the Capitol. She also found an entirely new audience in an unexpected place. In 1999, Robert had left law behind to co-found ZeniMax Media, which became the parent company of Bethesda Softworks, the studio behind the Elder Scrolls and Fallout franchises. Through that connection, Lynda lent her voice to characters across those game worlds, including roles in Elder Scrolls titles, and even wrote and performed original music for Fallout 4, introducing her voice to an entirely new generation of fans who had never seen a single episode of her original show. In 2020, Microsoft acquired ZeniMax Media in a deal worth roughly $7.5 billion, a staggering final chapter to the second career Robert had built after walking away from law following his trial. Hollywood came calling again too, with guest appearances on Law & Order and 2.5 Men, a nod to her comic book roots on Smallville, and a recurring role as the President of the United States on Supergirl. In 2020, she made an emotional cameo in Wonder Woman 1984, and in 2018 she received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, standing over it surrounded by her family after a career built on genuine talent and persistence. Then, in 2021 came the loss that defined the hardest chapter of her life. Robert Altman died on February 3rd of that year, in a Baltimore hospital, following complications from a medical procedure connected to a long private battle with myelofibrosis, a rare and aggressive form of blood cancer. He was 73. They had been married for 37 years, a partnership that had weathered fame, a federal trial, and a private recovery from addiction. In the aftermath, Lynda has spoken openly about her grief, saying she still doesn't fully know who she is without him, describing moments throughout her ordinary day where she instinctively still turns to ask him something before remembering he's gone. She has channeled much of that loss into music, releasing tribute songs written directly for him, and she later became a public supporter of the Translational Genomics Research Institute, appearing at fundraising events to help push research into myelofibrosis forward, saying she hoped the disease that took her husband would someday become curable for other families. In a small and deeply personal detail that speaks to how present his memory remained, when their daughter Jessica married in 2023, she had a piece of one of her father's blue shirts sewn into the lining of her wedding dress. It's worth sitting with how differently her story could have gone. A single car full of savings running out, one canceled audition, one plea deal accepted instead of fought, and none of the rest of it happens. Instead, at nearly every turning point, she chose the harder and more honest path over the convenient one, whether that meant walking away from a pageant crown, a toxic marriage, or a comfortable silence about her own addiction. Today, Lynda Carter stands as something far bigger than a piece of vintage television nostalgia. She is a woman who survived a difficult first marriage, rebuilt her life through genuine partnership, stood publicly by her husband through a federal trial, quietly fought and beat a serious addiction, and kept reinventing herself as a musician, a voice actor, and an advocate well into her 70s. The real lesson of her story has nothing to do with a costume or a magic lasso. It's that the strength people admired on screen was never fictional at all. So here's what I want to know from you. Which moment in Lynda Carter's real story says the most about who she actually is? Walking away from Hollywood for love, sitting through her husband's federal trial with her head held high, or quietly confronting her own addiction when almost no one else knew? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and we'll see you in the next one.